All right, everyone. I've never been a huge South Park fan, but I can admire how the show's creators have consistently egged on, antagonized, and mocked basically everyone from day one, and they've never stopped. If anything, it's gotten more edgy over time. I can't think of an individual group of people that hasn't been in some way mocked by South Park in some way. Like I can remember like back in the golden age of satirical cartoons on TV, like the more adult side of it. I can remember, Cartman as Hitler and stuff like that, and how funny that was. I was never a huge fan, but I have watched some episodes, and obviously, you're living under a rock if you haven't heard of the controversy surrounding the show. I don't see it as controversial because it's just funny. It's meant to be irreverent. So I wasn't surprised that they would mock Chinese censorship. So China has come out and is diving into more censorship now. And it was pointed out the other day, actually, and this is fucking totally true, that the U.S., like firms here, necessarily have a tendency to try to bow before Chinese censorship because of entangled trade. Like when U.S. firms are doing a huge amount of business with China, they don't want to piss off a country that's centrally authoritarian and will lean on its own firms, whether free market or not, because there is a free market element in their mixed economy now, to try to get U.S. firms to go with Chinese censorship. So right now, the NBA has cracked down on people criticizing China. They banned Southpark on the Chinese internet, and Southpark responded with a non-apology, basically telling them to fuck off. They're like, who cares? They did the right thing. This is what you do. When a bully is trying to silence you, you mock them. This teaches us exactly how we should respond to censorship in the West, too. Blizzard, not so much. This gaming firm, I guess they do Warcraft or something. I'm not even 100% sure because I'm not really a gamer. So a little bit of a boomer take. Some people were criticizing me the other day based on that with the Joker movie, and I'm like, I'm self-admitting that I'm not watching it. I'm just analyzing the corporate media's reaction to the movie and how screwed up it is. That's Clown World. I don't care what the movie's about. These people were analyzing it before the movie was even available to be watched based on a trailer or a couple things said by an actor who happens to be in the film. So you'll excuse me if I don't really care. The same is true here. It doesn't really matter what the company itself is about. Their response to China pressuring them to censor has been to ban individuals from competing in their tournaments, I guess gaming tournaments, based on them supporting Hong Kong. Right now, there's a massive authoritarian crackdown in Hong Kong by their pro-Chinese government elements. People are basically fighting a semi-bloodless revolution at this point. I stand completely with the protesters. I've seen enormous amounts of obvious paid Chinese shilling on the internet. In the wake of this, like on 4chan, they'll say like basically you're like you must be far left if you don't support China, or you must be like a Trumpanzee or something. It's really kind of screwed up because of the political paradigm here being so messy and so weird at the moment, so convoluted and arguably malleable. It actually makes the shilling, it seems, harder because they can't even find a central focus point to use for their propaganda. But I can tell you that there is paid propaganda on 4chan, definitely. Some of these people will even take up communist flags there because they're posing as just generic leftists instead of what they are, which is they're posting from China. China does have brigades of people do this. By the way, so does the U.S. U.S. Air Force has tens of thousands of fake Facebook accounts. They started that program like how many years ago? I think I talked about that a decade ago. It was when I wasn't even really into political commentary at the time. I was having to talk about stuff like that. Anyway, what we should do with censorship is this. It's very simple. Mock it. The easiest solution to attacks on free speech is to speak out. That's the first line of defense when the First Amendment, or the philosophical element behind it, free speech being different, is under attack. By the way, that matters. Do not allow authoritarians, censorship lovers, pearl clutchers, Chinese infiltrators, and other scumbags convince you that the First Amendment and free speech are the same thing. The First Amendment constrains the United States government from attacking people's right to speak freely, to express themselves. They still do through third parties, which is becoming the problem. The problem now is that they use corporations to do it for them. These private entities, so-called, are government co-opted. But the idea of free speech goes further. It's a philosophical idea that a society works best when even the most unpopular and odd opinions can be aired. Because when they're aired, they can be debated. When they're aired, the person isn't using their fists, they're using their mouth. It creates a more polite society, a more intellectual, rational society, and one in which people feel free to voice their grievances. The philosophy behind it is that people should be doing that way more than they do now. When we see the internet, and when someone's fired off a poll to me that showed that most Americans, and I doubt whether this is even true, but I'll just accept it for the point of argument here. The idea that most Americans support the idea of the government cracking down, like regulating the internet more, regulating what's said on the internet, which, by the way, is unconstitutional, but we'll get past that. That would be a terrible idea, because what would end up happening is that you would breed a culture that no longer had a respect for the idea of the free transfer of information. When you look at the pitchfork-waving mob on the internet and you say, oh my goodness, it's so edgy, people are telling each other to neck themselves and saying weird sexual shit, good. That's exactly what the founders had in mind. The free speech that you see on the internet that you consider bawdy or violent or innuendo, that's exactly what they were doing. These people went to orgies. These people had duels. These people did crazy shit that by modern standards would be like, whoa, they're way out. They would be trolling the internet. I guarantee that the founders, had they been enabled by the internet, as we have it today, to communicate rapid fire with one another, they would have been trolling. They would have been using memes because it's fun. It works. It is an intellectual endeavor. They're having political debates. It doesn't matter if you devolve into poo-poo pee-pee talk. It's still a political debate. This is the whole fucking point. These people used to mock each other incessantly, especially when they got drunk, which was basically every day. What else was there to do? Chop wood, shoot animals, get drunk, have orgies. That's basically how the United States was founded. That is the Enlightenment. That's enlightenment. That's how people are supposed to act. They're supposed to have complete freedom and latitude. Insofar, I mean, they have some obvious problems at the time, like owning slaves or, women not being represented. So, the equality wasn't complete, but we've been marching generally in the right direction. Corporations now have become the big weakness in the concept of free speech. Not the First Amendment, free speech as a philosophy, which the internet is intrinsically built off of. The internet couldn't even be in its current form if it weren't for the concept of free speech being held more or less in Western nations that happen to be the ones that run the internet. By cooperating with China, these firms are essentially committing treason against our founding document, and they should be prevented from doing so by mass action by the civilian population. Thankfully, what I see is a bunch of people mocking, ridiculing, and abandoning Blizzard, and applauding Southpark on this very token, the NBA bowing before Chinese censorship. Like someone had I'm going to mispronounce this, so keep in mind I'm from Vermont. The Uyghurs, I guess, it's an ethnic group that's discriminated against within China. I believe they practice Islam primarily, and the Chinese government is not a big fan of that. Think what you may about organized religion, but they're out in the hinterlands practicing some variant of Islam. It's not hurting the Chinese government too much. But somebody had a sign that said, Google this word, and they got ejected, I guess, from a game. And then people have been going on to these championship, like online gaming tournaments and holding up signs that say Free Hong Kong and stuff. By the way, the Hong Kong protesters literally using projectors over their head to use people's faces, like from games or pictures or whatever, to mask themselves from facial recognition software so that they can't be prosecuted by the Hong Kong commie government. Good. Anything that they at this point do is perfectly justified, up to and including the overthrow of their government, because their government has become illegitimate. It's obviously not representing the people of Hong Kong. It's representing the whims of Xi, essentially, who has a big problem with Winnie the Pooh, but, probably because he looks like Winnie the Pooh, fucking fat and stupid. Funny, this always seems to be the case with leftist regimes. You get some big fat doofus leading things, like you look at portly fucking Venezuelan dictator, what's his name, Maduro. He's a big fat ass and all of his people are starving. Why does that always happen? Of course, then in a capitalistic nation, or more capitalist, then the population becomes obese. But there's a little bit of a trade-off there. It's better to have a little bit too much than too little. from the perspective of anyone raising 10 kids, I suppose, especially, which also tends to happen in a place like Venezuela. Not so much China. No, they used to just slaughter their kids. They've got a gender imbalance there because everyone wanted sons. The Chinese government over and over again has fucked up with regards to its central planning since the days of Mao. It's really only one fuck up away from a depression right now. Trump's cracking down. The Chinese economy at some point is going to break, go into a tailspin, which, by the way, will be messy for us. It's not going to be pretty for us. I'm not sitting there saying, I can't wait for the Chinese people to suffer. I can't wait for us to approach recession. No, but I mean, what's the other alternative? China needs to understand that the world is not going to accept that level of authoritarianism. We've got enough authoritarianism here. We've got enough problems with Silicon Valley firms made by a bunch of supposedly left libertarian Gen Xers cracking down on free speech without having to worry about China pressuring US firms to censor more. By the way, there's no difference. How can I ask any liberals out there, how is there any real difference in ideology? Not, in China it's more state-run, here it's more corporate. But is there any real ideological difference in principle between the idea of them banning criticism of communism or Xi or something based on the fact that that's not free speech because it endangers society, and the idea that here politically inconvenient speech would be banned too? Oh, well, this can't be said because it's too extreme. That can't be said because it's hateful. This can't be said, you can't quote this crime statistic because it's hate. How is it any different? It's a false premise. The premise of the destabilization of society is only true if you assume stagnation of that society is the acceptable status quo, and that's what you're aiming for. Well, the state will run things, or the corporations, and everyone will be polite by force because otherwise we'll deperson them. We've even gotten to the point where you can't even bank anymore if you have certain political ideologies. Again, how is this any different? It's exactly the same tactics used in China for a long time. Silicon Valley here is acting literally like China. But China's become so authoritarian, they're putting so much pressure on firms that even the Silicon Valley groups here are uncomfortable with it. I would love to see the entire US internet completely shut out China. Why don't we just ban China from associating with any of our businesses, just to fucking wall them off completely so they can't sell anything? China would stop existing. The Chinese government would collapse. We can get our products from India and Malaysia and a million other places that are less authoritarian and partner with them. Screw communism and screw Xi Jinping. That's about all. Peace out.